Um, Renato, Renato. Olmedo, Olmedo.
Again?
Olmedo, Olmedo. He goes by Olmedo Gonzalez. He uses his two names.
And he's totally charming, as you can see.
He is great. He was my student when I was teaching here, and he was really great. And he got me very involved with Artes, and so I used to give talks when I was here through Artes as well. So since he brought up the muralists, and I was like, don't. The next piece we're going to be talking about is Diego Rivera, and specifically we're looking at Dream of a Sunday Afternoon in Alameda Central Park. And I'm going to give a bit of background on the muralist movement. I think it's really important to talk about that before we even delve into the mural. So I had mentioned the Mexican Revolution that I had said ends either, depending on who you're reading, they'll say 1917 or 1921. But we have the Mexican Revolution, in which they were seeking equal access of education, equal distribution of land, and things like that, right? Equal distribution of wealth, right? We had very, very divided social classes and very limited access to just about anything if you were not from the wealthy class. And so right after the revolution, we have a group of intellectuals who are trying to figure out who we are as Mexicans. And within this group, we have, great, I'm totally blanking on Jose Vasconcelos' name, but I didn't. We have Jose Vasconcelos, who is hired as the Minister of Education or Public Instruction, and he hires muralists to come to Mexico to paint didactic murals. The most famous of the muralists, and I just want to point out, there's a whole army of muralists painting throughout all of Mexico. We usually only focus on Los Tres Grandes, or the Three Greats, and we usually only discuss Mexico City. But just so that you know, there was a lot more going on. Does anyone in the class know who the Tres Grandes were? Orozco. Rivera. Y Siqueiros.
How do you spell the last
Siqueiros. And so we have these three muralists that are very popular at the time. Possibly the most popular and the one with the biggest ego of them all would be Diego Rivera. And within their murals, they're retelling a history of Mexico that had long been oppressed. They're rediscovering their historic indigenous roots. This also coincides with many archaeological digs. So we're actually having the past literally being dug out at around this time, and these artists are actually looking at these objects for inspiration. A lot of the muralists will actually also be traveling throughout Mexico to learn more about the different customs and people from the regions. And it is something they will be representing in their murals. If you look at the murals, you'll notice, of course, you'd need to know a little bit about the history to be able to identify, but you'll notice different regional costumes and customs being represented in a lot of these murals. The murals, of course, were being painted on public buildings, right? Making art accessible to the public. A lot of them condemn easel painting. Why would they condemn easel painting? Class.
And it's exclusive. It's elitist.
It's mostly, yes, it is European, but it's because it's elitist, right? And when you have a painting, it's usually hung in an interior, and it's accessible to a very limited amount of people, accessible both economically but also to see it visually, right? Whereas a mural painted on a public site is accessible to everyone. And so they're pushing forth their political agenda, they're trying to educate people about their history and customs and culture. And they're also promoting literacy and education programs through these murals. Other countries will have similar programs inspired by Mexico. We'll have the New Deal here in the United States, having smaller scaled mural projects, but we will have them. And a lot of muralists in the 40s and 50s will be moving back and forth between Mexico and mainly New York. But of course, we know we have the really famous Detroit murals. But New York will be a point in which New York and California actually will be points in which we'll have a lot of this back and forth going on between Mexico and the United States. Actually, it's usually the Mexican artists moving back and forth.
Just, again, some of you may know this, but when you say looking back at Mexican history that might have been repressed or erased, are they interested in going back 100 years, or are they interested in going back 3,000?
Okay, thanks for the question. So they're looking back at Aztec and Mayan history. We'll be looking a lot of iconography being pulled from that language. So we'll be seeing plumed serpents, for example, jaguars being used. We have a plumed serpent in here. And jaguars being brought in. So not so much their European colonial history. They will see that as the catalyst for bad things happening to Mexicans. But a lot of these mural cycles, like this one, and it's a lot, so I'm not really going to go into the detail, but let me project a better copy of it. So I found, again, thanks to Flickr, I wanted you to see the scale. So that's why I was trying to find someone. But this is the scale. So it's just so that you can see the size of the mural.
Where is this work again?
It's in, it's in a hotel.
In Mexico City?
Yes, it was a commissioned piece. Do I have the name of the hotel? I didn't write it. Did I have it in the first one, right? There we go. So it was originally in the hotel, yes. In the Hotel del Prado, it was a commissioned piece. And
Has it been moved?
it's been moved now. It's in a museum. In Mexico. Yes, it's still in Mexico. Sorry. Okay, sorry. So I think the hotel doesn't exist anymore, and that's why it got moved. So it got rescued, and it's now in a museum.
But are they on canvas where they can rescue them, or some of them right on the built fresco?
They make them both ways. So some of them will be painted on the wall. Some of them will be in a fresco style. Some of them will not be in a fresco style. Some of them will just be a paint on.
So they may have taken this and run out of the wall. It could have been on the wall, but they could have transferred
But-
the whole
But some of them are what are known as portable murals. So those will be made on canvas or on board, and that you can move in. MoMA has several portable murals by Diego Rivera. Several.
Does the word Prado mean something in Spanish? Is this a Hotel del Prado, and I'm just thinking of the Prado Museum? Does it mean?
I mean, it's just probably makes you think of luxury or something like that. But
Does it
no, that's
mean
just the
something?
hotel name.
Okay,
Yeah.
got it.
So there were different types of murals. And eventually they'll even make, well, at the UNAM they'll have some that are made even out of tin because they're experimenting. So here we see a history of Mexico being portrayed. We see the revolution and peasants. What's usually the best known portion of this mural is the central part. It would be this close up here. And that's what's usually reproduced and discussed. However, the corners shouldn't be ignored. they do have to connect back to the history. So it goes all the way from pre-Columbian to present to lead us to the center, where we have several known characters, but I'm going to focus on just 3 of them. We have a child, Diego Rivera, a very young Diego Rivera, holding the hand of La Calavera Catrina, and we have a full-bodied Catrina standing next to him. And then kind of in between behind them is a Frida Kahlo holding a yin-yang sign, which is kind of odd, but that's how he decided to
What's behind her? Frida Kahlo.
Oh.
Frida, I see Frida.
Yeah, Frida Kahlo.
Yeah. That's a photograph. There's a photograph of her in that exact
Yeah.
outfit also.
Yeah, so we have the child, Diego Rivera, Frida Kahlo, and Catrina.
Can you tell what Frida's holding?
She's holding a yin-yang.
Yeah. What?
Yin-yang.
Yin yang. Oh,
Yeah, yin-yang.
Yin yang. Got it.
Yeah, I said it too fast. A yin-yang.
I'm not familiar with that.
Oh yeah, I'll talk about her. That's why I brought her in. She's a quite popular, famous lady. So La Catrina. Catrina is a term that's used to refer, or used to be used to refer to upper class women, and she is popularized by Jose Guadalupe Posada, who was a printmaker illustrator at Mexico in the late 19th century, early 20th century. Posada, some of you have probably seen his caraveras around. They're pretty popular. His work was disseminated mostly through penny press, right, through cheap publications. Illustration at the time is really important because illiteracy is very high, right? So we learn through looking at drawings. And his work is very, very popular. It's humorous. It's slightly crude. It's fun.
Maria Del Mar,
Yes.
You know where I've seen that image is Day of the Dead.
Yeah, well, so we think about the calaveras and we associate them, right? The skulls, the sugar skulls with the Day of the Dead. And in the case of in Mexican culture, their relationship with death is not the same as we tend to have in the U.S., right? In the U.S., we seem to be kind of more afraid of it. It's more taboo. We're not as open to it. Whereas in Mexico, it's just seen as a natural part of life, right? And there's a lot of respect for your elders and your ancestors, and even visiting a cemetery and leaving little relics, gifts for your ancestors it's such a different relationship from here. I go maybe once a year if I'm visiting my parents, where in Mexican culture there are a lot of times in which people will visit and they'll leave food and gifts. For kids, I've seen kids, right, they'll leave little toys and balloons and candy if it's a dead child. And so we have this relation. Yes, we associate it a lot with the Day of the Dead because we're more familiar with that here in the U.S. There's also a certain type of humor about death, right? You can't avoid death, so we kind of shouldn't be afraid of it and just kind of embrace it and be humorous about it.
So that's what she kind of represents, is this
This,
embracing of death.
I mean, everybody's gonna die, even upper class women, right? We're all gonna die. And he shows like the different classes, so you'll see his calaveras will have, like you can tell some of them because of what they're wearing, because they're clothed, will be upper and lower class, and in the end we're all the same, is kind of one of his running comments.
So is it like saying we all put our shoes on one at a time? I mean, is it
I
like that?
I guess.
That's equality?
Yeah.
That makes us all equal?
Yeah, we're all the same, yeah.
Is it
We-
makeup on the face?
On her, no.
Flat lips? No.
No. Oh, this one does have like red lips, but the Posada one doesn't. I thought you were asking about the Posada. So in the larger mural, let me just go back to it real quick.
Before you leave that slide,
Oh,
is there any significance for the gentleman that she has, that's right next to her here on our right?
this guy.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm going to go to the big mural because I'm going to talk about the figures in general, because otherwise we would take a whole class going over the who's who, and off the top of my head, I'll be able to pick out a couple, but not all of them. So in the mural in general, we're seeing a span of 400 years of Mexican history being painted. This is a fairly common theme within the muralists. They will paint a history of Mexico. So it'll go pre-Columbian to present. Usually, it's very critical of the colonial period, usually. It'll show you abuse of power of the Europeans, and then right before, and then it'll continue showing this abuse of power under the Porfiriato, right, in which the local upper class continues to abuse the indigenous or the mixed population. So they're very critical. Ironically, a lot of these artists are coming out of this class, so it's very contradictory. Another thing that I didn't mention, but I should mention, is they're diehard communists.
Yes.
Diehard communists. The artists are. And so they'll write a manifesto in which they talk about the death of easel painting, and how monumental, I guess, public art should be accessible to everybody. They also, the way they style themselves. So when we talked about Frida Kahlo, we talked about how she dresses up as an indigenous woman. The male artists, very much in a line of thinking of the Soviets, will be wearing overalls. They do not think there's a distinction between any kind of worker, so they, as painters, are equals to a mechanic or a factory worker or a carpenter. And so here we don't see it because he's showing himself as a younger upper class child, which is what he was. But when you see him portraying in photos of himself or in self-portraits, he'll usually be wearing denim or overalls, right? Denim at the time being associated with workers' clothes, although now it's trendy and cool, as we can see that. Diego Rivera, though, his communism is very contradictory, right? He accepted large commissions of well-known capitalists in the United States, which eventually led for him being kicked out of the Communist Party in Mexico for not being a true communist. I mean, if you really are a communist, why are you taking money from a Rockefeller? He is the devil. And they actually do paint them as devils in some of these paintings, which are kind of hilarious. Let me see if I'm forgetting anything. We're seeing the Alameda Central Park is, which is where they're being depicted at, right? Is Mexico City's largest park. Parks are something that are interesting. Now we think of parks as accessible to everyone, but at one time parks used to be limited to upper classes. And so here we're seeing 400 years of Mexican history gathering through, it's kind of a motley crew of a stroll, right? It just doesn't make any sense, but they're kind of strolling, all hanging out at the park at the same time.
So you're saying it represents several different eras?
Yes.
Right, and so can we then say maybe several different social classes, or are they just very distinct?
Yes, no, we actually have workers and lower class people that we can easily see here. I don't have I hope you guys get a really good quality image of this because this was the best one I could find. The one I pulled from the internet, as you can see, is getting really pixelated by blowing it up. Oh, sorry. But we're seeing different, so here we're seeing, right, different classes. Everybody's dressed, I guess, impeccably within their class as best they can. We see beautiful, very beautiful colored, colorful balloons.
So is this
I'm trying to think if there's
commissioned
any.
by the city or commissioned by the hotel?
This was commissioned at the time by the hotel. Again, kind of contradictory in this whole, like, I'm a communist, equal for everyone, right? Because it's being made in a hotel. Also, this death to the easel painting is, again, another kind of contradictory thing because they all, as painters, continued practicing easel painting. But at the time, the two most popular forms of art within this group of artists was muralism and printmaking. Printmaking associated with mass production, circulation, cheap, right, accessible work. Which is one of the reasons I got into studying printmaking. I'm just really fascinated with that.
Does the history read like in a linear way across the mural, or do you kind of have to?
It's reading.
Recognize
It's sweeping into the middle.
the middle?
Mm-hmm.
So
So here we're seeing big sombreros, which we kind of associate with figures such as Pancho Villa. So this is probably the Mexican Revolution. I'm just trying to. I'm curious as to why this piece, though, because there are other pieces that I would have.
why do you suppose he painted himself as a child?
I've actually read several different interpretations.
In a sense, he was a child of XYZ, therefore.
So I've actually read several interpretations as of why he's portraying himself as a child. Of course, again, art history, there's no single right answer. One interpretation that I read was that at the time he was painting this, he was feeling very helpless about his relationship with Frida Kahlo. Another interpretation that I've read is that this was that he was close in age, so this is like reminding him of like when he would visit this as a kid. So Frida Kahlo died in 54. This is painted in 47. So she was going through some really hard health problems, and so, like I said, different interpretations. One, he felt like a hopeless child because he couldn't do anything for her health, and another one is kind of a nostalgia throwback to his childhood memories of the park. Do you have?
I drew the picture of
Oh, the Katrina, isn't she beautiful? And then she has the feathered, right, the plumed serpent, making reference to pre-Columbian history and mythology. So there's all these little items that we could kind of nitpick through. I'm just curious why this and not like, I would have chosen the Ministry of Education murals. I'm not sure why this one.
So if you're a Mexican kid looking at this, would you like understand the history of it all?
A Mexican person will.
Okay.
So that's another thing that's really interesting. For us, it takes us a couple minutes, maybe more, to figure out who everybody is and where they stand. But there's a lot of sense of pride in national history and culture. And somebody local could break it down really quickly.
Consider this nationalistic?
Oh, yes. All of the muralists, all the projects made by the muralists were highly nationalistic. There's a specific political propaganda that they're pushing at this time, and they're all working towards it. At times it might be contradictory. Sometimes they'll find themselves at odds. But there's this trying to create a sense of nationalism for all of us that is equal going through it.
Would the Ministry of Education commissions be comparable to the WPA in the United States? Like, where in the New Deal, the government recognizes people are out of jobs, we're going to give you money to make art? Or is it more like a propaganda?
I would say, well, the New Deal is inspired by this, definitely. I think the New Deal projects, I mean, the murals were inspired by these. I think the New Deal was a much larger scale project than the muralist project was.
That's cool. I didn't realize that.
But there are overlaps.
So when you say it's inspired by, so this predates. So like the 30s when we begin to see a lot of murals.
Well, this is a later piece that we're looking at, but the Mexican muralist movement starts in the 20s.
Oh, okay.
How much control did the artists have over the content?
A lot. Yeah. I think they were told there's a specific type of agenda that we want. But that I know of, I don't think they were told this is the only subject matter you can paint on.
You know, in the Western view of art, this came in not so much on its own. I think merit as it did, this influenced Jackson Pollock. You know, Jackson Pollock had a chance to see the muralists using paint that was car paint or whatever paint, painting on a huge scale, you know, and all of that is seen as influencing his media, his scale.
Yeah.
You know, as opposed to Mexican muralists as their own moment style.
Oh yeah, in the U.S. we don't usually, I mean this isn't really spoken about. Sometimes people do talk about the Rockefeller, the demolishing the murals at the Rockefeller Center, but that's kind of it. A lot of these artists, not Rivera, but some of the other ones were actually using more industrial car type paints to create these, experimenting. So the parallel that I wanted to draw, going back to the question between New Deal and the muralist project, I mean, we usually talk about it as the muralist project, but it's not the only thing that is going on at the time. There is this desire to rediscover and document Mexico's past and Mexico's culture and people. It's a contradictory situation because they also see the indigenous person as nostalgic, but also as an illiterate person who basically cannot be fixed. Some scholars have written about the Indian problem in Mexico at the time. So they're trying to save them, rescue them, nostalgically, symbolically, but in reality, they're really trying to, I guess, westernize them. And it becomes a very contradictory agenda of what's going on. And Mary Coffey specifically has written about this. She's an art historian who's out at Dartmouth right now.
Spell her last name.
Coffey, Coffey.
Oh.
Mary Coffey. And so in Mexico, we are seeing this documentation that the New Deal project was doing. New Deal is employing artists, so we usually talk about the artist portion, but they also hired a lot of historians and anthropologists to record music and photograph and to just take notes of customs that they thought were getting lost or would be lost. And this is actually happening in territories, in US territories as well, but that's another class. But Puerto Rico's doing it too.
And in American Samoa.
And so the US territories we're getting, and the Virgin Islands we're getting photographed as well. And like I said, this is a whole different side project that we could go into. But little armies of people were being sent to document this. Any questions about this piece? Because we have two more. So I feel like I'm going to run through this one. Okay. Sorry. So now we're at the contemporary global content. So content area 10. And in content area 10, we have Pepón Osorio who is a Puerto Rican artist. Actually, Pepón Osorio is a very interesting case. So Puerto Rico becomes a colony of the United States, even though the US refuses to use that term. In 1898, it is still a territory of the United States to this day. So the Puerto Rico-US relationship is one that's very fraught, and a lot of people don't really understand. So Puerto Ricans have been citizens of the United States since 1917 under the Jones Act. Some historians have hinted at 1917 being a magical date. Does anybody know what was going on worldwide in 1917?
World War I.
Yeah, specifically the US decides to enter and needs bodies. Some people have debunked that. That's something that's very much debated amongst historians. But it just kind of happened that they magically, the dates coincided. So I'm just going to say that. I'm not going to say I agree or disagree, but I'm going to say it's interesting. So the US was going to enter World War I and needed bodies. And back then, you were drafted. So my grandpa is a Korean War veteran without ever wanting to go to war. We have artist Pepón Osorio, who is active in Philadelphia. He's Puerto Rican. He's actually a social worker. So when we talk about his work, that's going to be really important because his take on art is very different from an artist, I think. So he's a trained social worker. He was a practicing social worker. Now he's teaching out of Temple University. He's affiliated with the art department. Pepón Osorio's body of work in general connects a lot with social justice, access, and debunking stereotypes.
Can you say those again?
Social justice, access, so equality, and debunking stereotypes. If we have time, I'll play a clip. He's on Art 21. So there's a really great Art 21, and I wanted to show a video because, so when Pepón Osorio creates this piece, it's a grant that he wins, and he selects a specific location in this area that has a large Puerto Rican and African American population that was facing lots of hardship. They had, high illiteracy rates. So the negative stereotypes that get associated, high illiteracy rates, and a lot of single moms are two of the big problems that he was facing. And as a social worker, whenever he enters a site, he's about making true change. So he doesn't just show up and does a cool art project like a lot of people do when you think about, community work. He's actually about making a difference in people's lives. So this piece has many different levels to it. It's very personal to him. He talks about masculinity within the barbershop, and it goes back to memories of himself as a child. The first time he got a haircut, he cried, and he got told, there's no crying allowed in the barbershop, right? Man up. He talks about, he's Afro-Puerto Rican, so he talks about his afro and how they pulled his hair. So we have aspects of masculinity and race coming in. And so he creates this faux barbershop. Let me show you. This is the storefront. So they actually create a barbershop in collaboration with the community. And the barbershop is open, and people could hang out. You could have haircuts, and people actually started using it as a site. Because he's a social worker, he also started holding workshops and talks in it to talk about the problems that were gnawing at the community, right? So for example, why were so many of the men getting their girlfriends pregnant and running away, right? How does this tie into machismo, right? Oh, as a macho, right, I just get a woman pregnant and leave her behind, right? So he's trying to get at the root of all of these social problems. So I really love this project. I think it's a project that truly does try to push for social change, and I think a lot of his projects open up really great conversations rather than him parachuting and then leaving the area.
Still there?
No, so this piece, unfortunately, sorry, I went the wrong way. This piece is now owned by the Museum of Puerto Rican Art in Puerto Rico. So if you decide to go to Puerto Rico, you can see it. Unfortunately, it's no longer an interactive piece. So when it first opened, you could move around it and play with it. If you look at the different chairs, they're inspired by boys' pastimes. So there's like a basketball, baseball chair, right? They're, you've seen a Yankees, right? New York Yankees, baseballs, things that are associated with boys, masculinity. Throughout the installation, on the top of the chairs, he has TV monitors with videos of men crying without audio, because men are not supposed to cry. He's painted the walls in pink, which I think is quite funny. Let me go back to the first image, right? So here we have the wall in pink, but he has a kind of a tattoo theme going on, right? With the roses, the bullets, and then it says, perdóname, so pardon me, you know. Throughout the walls, he has photographs of very well-known African American and Latino, and I should explain what Latino is since I've mentioned it a couple times, and Latino or Puerto Rican athletes or celebrities. And so I've mentioned Latino a few times, and do we know what I mean by Latino, what the difference is? Because I was talking about Latin America before this, and now I just totally code switched on you and I said Latino. Anybody? So Latino we usually use to, as when we're referring to people of Latin American descent in the United States. The government loves the word Hispanic. I despise the word Hispanic. So they usually make reference to a similar thing. It's an umbrella term. It makes things easier for the government to manage us, right? When you're when you're just a homogenous body of people, rather than asking you your individual racial or ethnic background, right? Hispanic, Latino, easy, we're done with it. But in Pepe Nosorio's case, he specifically is Puerto Rican. But he plays, a lot of his work goes against stereotypes of Latino, Hispanic men and associations with violence. Incarceration is one of his favorite themes. He has some great work specifically that focuses on violence. But this one again, stereotypes, and it's interesting how it connects to him personally, right, his background, but also to the area, the people, very much understood what he had gone through. Are there any questions about? There's a lot of silence on this one.
With the sculpture.
Saint Lazarus. So this is Saint Lazarus, and Saint Lazarus, if you're talking about Santeria in Catholicism, he's a very famous figure among Puerto Ricans and Cubans. He's got a dog and he's on crutches.
So
San Lazaro.
is he exclusively an installation artist, or does he do often?
We have a piece of him downstairs. He does a lot of installation work, but he does a lot of kind of sculptural work. Yeah, he loves kitsch. And as we can see the chair, he's playing off of the idea of kitsch and cheap trinkets. The chandelier you'll see downstairs is another one that's going to be full of little cheap, like dollar store type trinkets that talk about childhood memories, but also, right, these have to do with childhood memories, but also access to goods, right? They're little cheap trinkets, stuff that just about anyone can afford.
When you had the other picture up there with the roses and you said there was a reference to tattoo parlors,
to gang tattoos.
To gang tattoos,
Yeah.
roses.
Yeah, so you see like gang tattoos or.
Because then underneath we're seeing what looks almost like pop art bullets, is that right? Is that what we're seeing beneath the roses?
Yeah.
Or those
I mean,
tattoos?
I wouldn't call them pop art, but if we were talking about tattoos, this would be Americana style.
But are those bullets or is that a tattoo?
Those are bullets.
Okay.
So that would be like a tattoo. If you were in a gang, you have a rose tattoo with your bullets. That's your like badge of honor.
Got it.
Probably I killed someone, right? The bullets probably represent. And he has another piece called badge of honor. Sorry, that's why I kind of threw that one in. That has to do with gang violence, and it's really good. So I highly recommend watching his Art 21. It's really, he's fun and eloquent, and his work is very beautiful because of this whole, social justice component to it that I think misses in a lot of art. It has come up, I've had debates with friends about whether or not this is true art.
What do they say?
Because they think it's activism and this should not be considered art. So art should just be beautiful. So it goes back to the arts for art's sake debate. And I'm like, oh, come on. What century are we in? And like I said, it's an installation piece. You were actually encouraged to use it back then. Now I'm just going to show you a shot of it. And here we see a pool table, right? So manly things macho men do. So if you go to the Museum of Puerto Rico, you can see it, but probably from about this distance, you can't walk through it, unfortunately.
So did they just take all the objects and then just
reinstalled it?
rebuild a room?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I'm not sure how identical the layout is going to be.
So are they plates across the top?
Those are, hubcaps. Yeah, because if you're macho, you have cars, right? It's about racing and who has the most tricked out car.
Yeah, there's flowers everywhere.
Yeah, well, those would be lowriders, and that's a Mexican-American tradition. So that's, so that's a different one. But tricked out cars, all boys. That's a cross. Mostly men, most men love cars and playing on them, fixing them up.
When you said that when you installed it, they actually used it, like, how many people are you talking about that go in and?
Up dozens of people, just the community. They would hang out outside if it was closed, they would just hang out on the steps, on the stoop, and just drink soda and hang out and talk. And when it opened, people would just go in. And he also encouraged them, right, by holding, not lectures, but I guess discussions. And so it invited you to go in, and at one point, apparently, barbers just started bringing their electric shears and just giving people cuts. And that's what he wanted, right? This community involvement, and he didn't want to be like this foreigner, right, this foreign person from the area that comes in. And I'm a big fan.
Did he grow up in that neighborhood?
He's Puerto Rican. This is in the state. Well,
How did he choose Hartford, Connecticut?
It was a grant he got in the area, but he also was looking for areas in which he felt he could make a change, a difference.
Okay.
And one interesting aspect about Pepón Osorio's work is that he's become really famous, but he tends to prefer to show his work first in community-based spaces and have his work be accessible to the community. And I'd said the community is very involved in producing if he does something like this, rather than going to a mainstream museum. He's very connected to the people rather than to the elites that we tend to associate with museums. And not all of his work are installations, but when he does like community-based projects, the community's involved since the very beginning. So he's fun.
Where's the largest concentration of Puerto Rican?
New York.
It is New York. But he wasn't showing in New York.
This is Connecticut. I mean the East
Close
Coast.
enough.
Yeah, sorry. So I'm just like the East Coast. So New York historically has been the biggest site. I'm not sure if it's shifting to Florida. I think Florida has a really big, and if you probably remember the elections last year, the Puerto Rican population was a really important target for both political parties because they knew, people always say Cubans, but the Puerto Rican population has grown so much, they really needed to get the Puerto Ricans on board.
Puerto Ricans voted that they want to become a state.
Wow.
That's a completely different talk. And that's highly debatable and still contested to this date. Chicago has a large population too. So the East Coast historically, but Chicago. And Hawaii. A lot of Puerto Ricans were hired as field workers because the crops are identical. So you didn't have to train anybody on how to grow pineapples or tend to sugarcane. And there's a lesser known group of, I think it was in the 20s or 30s, that came throughout the Southwest. They just mixed with a lot of the Mexican American population, intermarried. And because the name was different, similar, the names are similar in the customs, they had affinities, and people don't know or care about the difference between the different groups. They just kind of got lost. But there's a really great project. There's a Puerto Rican artist who's been working on the Mexican and Puerto Rican connections. And I brought him, he was here when I was teaching here. I brought him to talk about it.
This is an art historical either, but I just finished Sonia Sotomayor's memoir, and she speaks about the Puerto Rican neighborhoods in New York.
And when she was nominated, if you listen to the news, they'll say Sonia Sotomayor of Puerto Rican immigrant parents. Puerto Rican immigrant parents, and then that's completely wrong because Puerto Ricans are U.S. citizens, right? Yeah. What's his name? The British guy on HBO. John Oliver had a really funny piece on the territories and how people don't think about them as citizens. We have one last piece. We have 10 minutes to get to it. Okay, so we have Doris Salcedo. She's a Colombian artist. She's interesting. She identifies herself as a third world artist or an international artist. She doesn't want her work to only be read as Colombian. If you go to Chicago through May, there's an amazing retrospective of her work up. It's going to the Guggenheim in either late May or early June. Yeah. Her work is amazing. I was just blown away to see it. I need to go back. That's how good it was. This piece, this is a site-specific piece. Ooh, I get to use history term. Site-specific piece that was created for Tate Modern in London. And I was actually looking for the crack when I was at Tate Modern over the summer. Just like, where is it? They fixed it too well. I can't find it.
Wait for 1 second, because I heard that they didn't deliberately fill it in because they had to, but they filled it in with a darker colored cement. So
I didn't see it.
It's gonna be there.
Maybe I was on the wrong side.
Yeah, I had a friend who just saw it and said it's amazing.
I don't remember seeing it.
That's the same space that the sunflower seeds.
Yeah, this is a popular spot. This is where they hold the Unilever. Unilever, you know, soaps? They have like these sponsored shows, and the Ai Weiwei piece was a Unilever sponsored piece too. I guess that's the site they always use. I noticed that the other day when I was rewatching the Art 21 on Ai Weiwei. Yeah. So there's an Art 21 on her that you should watch. I've also, I've hyperlinked, they interviewed her talking about this piece at Tate, so I've hyperlinked it. It's about 5 minutes. I was hoping that we could play it, but I don't think we have time. So what do you think the title makes reference to? Does anybody know what the word means?
It's a word or phrase that you have to say in order to prove you are when you say you are.
Kind of.
It sounds Hebrew, isn't it? I thought it sounded Hebrew too.
But the meaning, not the origin, the meaning. Do we know the? So a shibboleth is, it's a custom, a principle, or a belief that distinguishes a particular group of people. And it's usually considered outmoded. And so we associate it with immigrant or exiled communities, right? So when you're tied back to old world customs, I guess. And so this piece has to do with immigration in Europe. It represents borders and the experience of immigrants crossing borders and segregation, the segregation that immigrants face. And it's interesting because we don't think as much about immigration in terms of Europe as we do the United States, probably because we're here, right? And we think about the US-Mexico border, the wall, the gates, like depending what state you're in, depending how militarized it is, gated, whatever they have it, electric. But Europe also has a large influx of immigrants, and they face discrimination. And there's a lot of racial hatred, and not just of immigrants, but of different ethnic groups. When I was in France last summer, the Jewish community was facing an outbreak of violence against them, right? This is a this is the historic Jewish neighborhood I was in, and people were still discriminating against them, still saying, you're not one of us. Now we've had a similar take on Muslims, right? So if you're Muslim, you're not one of us, which doesn't make any sense, but, right, this segregation, just because we might have different backgrounds, customs. And so, in a nutshell, since we're almost out of time, but I will be giving you the videos so that you can look more on it, and bibliography. These are the type of things that Doris Salcedo is commenting on. Her work, she's very interested in violence in general in her body of work, oppression, repression, right? If you were to see her exhibit, her retrospective, a lot of it has to do with military abuse. And so violence seems to be kind of a thread. She's also very, it's a minimalist type of work, right? She works with very minimal materials. In this case, it's as simple as cracking a floor. And so we're seeing this negative and positive space, right, within this, the wind turbine hall. The negative space being the one occupied, right, by the immigrants, the unwanted people. So I'm thinking.
So, in this movie, will it talk about how she actually
made it?
Yeah, made it.
I haven't seen it yet. I was trying to play it earlier and it wasn't playing for me because I don't know what was going on with the, I'm trying to think if I've seen her talk about, I'm not sure if she'll talk about how she made it. I'm not sure how much she makes, right? If we're talking about minimalist artists,
Right.
hands off. But she'll talk about the symbolism. I'm not sure if she talks about how she made it in that piece. It's on the Tate Modern website. Tate Modern also has a lot of pictures of it that have been taken of, and so now this piece now lives. The documentation of this piece is what now lives on, and we could go into the whole argument, these debates about, did the piece end once it got refilled, or
I'm pretty sure it was refilled in black.
I don't remember it being, but you know what? I could have been on, because there's two identical halls, and I could have just been on the wrong side. And just not even.
He's an art historian and modern artist himself, but he was there and he said it's amazing because they filled it in so you can actually see where it was.
Yeah, so I could have just been on the wrong side. I'm gonna have to go back to London. There's an excuse. But now we have it in the form of photograph and in video. And so that's I guess we're left with the documentation and the residue in order to use postmodern language.
If you were to talk more about this as did you see it when it was the craft?
No. This was back in 2007.
Would the experience have been of stepping over?
Oh, hold on. I grabbed a bunch of pictures. So we have a picture so that you see how big it kind of terrifies me. And then, what is this kind of, hold on, apparently I threw some text over this without meaning to. Not that, this. It's not what I'm telling you to do, PowerPoint. Ah, sorry. That's what I'm trying to get it. Okay, there we go. So it's a serious crack. I can see it being a safety hazard.
Yeah.
Terrifies me that somebody could have broken something.
Those high heels could fall right down.
Yeah. That one shot is pretty beautiful. And
Is there a place that's that deep? The one shot made it look like it was as deep as this room.
oh, hold on.
Like
Sorry.
space.
Here's my notes.
So this is an airline, it gets bigger and bigger.
Yeah.
Oh, she talks, I just saw my note to myself, scar. She talks about it as a scar. And somebody else talks about scars. Maya Lin talks about the scar in the earth. So that's just kind of this idea of like the minimalist aesthetic, but also the same concept of the scar. So a lot of these, you can just find a Flickr. Flickr is your friend. And if you're a teacher, a lot of times, because you know some Flickr accounts will actually let you download and others not. I've heard that, if you just say, I'm a teacher, it's for education, some people will just very gladly give you a free PDF or whatever it is you need of their images. So I kind of encourage you to, if you find something really cool on Flickr and can't access it, to just shoot people an email. Yeah.
You can do it though. Most people, you can just send the URL to your district and say, I need this, and they unlock.
Oh, Flickr is blocked?
Yeah.
Oh, ours.
What about the photo people? You can't upload or anything?
Photography is a whole category of
So you can do it at home.
And a lot of people